The snow and wind lashed straight into his face, so cold it burned his skin. As he stepped outside the gate, the figure of a woman emerged through the thick curtain of snow. She stood tall, not shivering despite her body being covered in wounds. A large Apache woman, broad-shouldered, muscles showing beneath her torn coat. Her bare feet were buried in the snow, her black hair matted from the freezing wind. When Morgan turned the light up higher, she finally spoke, her voice low and raspy. "I need a place just for this one night. I will do anything to serve you." Morgan looked at her for a few seconds, not because of the offer, but because he recognized the look in her eyes. Someone cornered with no way out, no more choices, nowhere else to go. He unlocked the gate and pulled it open for her to step inside. "One more hour out here, and you would be dead. Come in." Asha Redmoon said nothing more. She stepped through the gate, each step heavy, like someone who had walked for miles in despair. Morgan led her into the house, shut the door, and blocked out the storm. The fireplace was still glowing with warmth. The little house, once meant for only one person, now had another breath inside, unfamiliar, powerful, and full of secrets. And that winter was no longer quiet. Morgan brought Asha into the small wooden cabin where the warmth from the fire immediately wrapped around them both. She stood near the door like a wild animal seeking shelter. The light from the fireplace spilled across her shoulders and arms, revealing every bruise, every long, greyish-purple scar. Morgan set the oil lamp down on the table and said softly, "Come sit closer to the fire. It is cold." Asha hesitated for a moment, then walked over to the fireplace. She sat down on the wooden floor, her large, bony hands reaching out toward the heat. She did not make a sound, but Morgan could see the pain in every heavy breath she took. He ladled out a bowl of hot soup and handed it to her. Asha looked at the bowl, then looked up at Morgan and asked in a quiet voice, "Aren't you afraid of me?" "No. White men usually are," Morgan answered simply. "I just see someone about to freeze to death. That is all." Asha lowered her head and began to eat, each spoonful seeming to take all the strength she had left. Morgan added a few more logs to the fire, the crackling sound filling the room like the house's familiar whisper. When she finished, Asha set the bowl down and pulled the blanket he had given her over her bruised legs. A long while passed before she finally spoke, still not looking at him. "I will leave in the morning. I do not want to cause any trouble." Morgan squinted at the frost-covered window. Outside was nothing but thick white, and the wind howled so fiercely the door rattled on its hinges. "Where will you go?" Asha said. "Nothing," Morgan continued, his voice calm but firm. "The snow is knee-deep. Going out there now is suicide." Asha looked up at him, the suspicion in her eyes slightly fading, though the guardedness remained. "If I stay, what do you want me to do?" Morgan leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Nothing. Just stay until the storm passes." Asha stared at him for a long time, as if searching his eyes for some hidden meaning. But Morgan did not look away. He said nothing more, only handed her another blanket. At last she lay down by the fire, her breathing slowly evening out. Morgan sat at the table, whittling wood to pass the time, occasionally glancing at the giant woman now curled up like a child. Outside, the white storm still screamed, and in Morgan Hale's little cabin, a strange night quietly unfolded. A night neither he nor Asha knew would lead to something more, because by morning the snow would be deeper, the cold harsher, and they would not be able to part ways as they had planned. The next morning, Morgan woke early as usual. He opened the door and looked outside. The snow had piled up almost to the doorstep, and the wind was blowing so hard it felt like it could hurl the whole cabin down into the valley. No one, not even someone as strong as Asha, could go anywhere in weather like this. Asha woke up shortly after him. She stretched, her solid muscles showing clearly beneath the thin layer of her shirt. She looked toward the door, then turned to Morgan, her voice low but calm. "I guess I am not leaving yet." Morgan handed her a cup of hot water. "You guessed right." Asha sipped slowly, then stood and stepped out back with Morgan. Instead of staying idle, she suddenly bent down and lifted an entire broken tree trunk as if it were a piece of kindling. Morgan stood there watching, letting out a low whistle of surprise. "Have you always been this strong?" Asha shrugged. "To survive in my tribe, you have to be strong." That entire day, they worked side by side, repairing the horse stable, clearing paths, chopping more wood. Asha did the work of two grown men without complaint. Morgan did not say it out loud, but her presence made the house feel bigger and somehow warmer. That evening, as they shared a simple meal by the fire, Asha sat hugging her knees, her eyes fixed on the flames. Then, without warning, she said, "I have not been with anyone in months. What about you?" Morgan froze for a moment. He sat down his bowl, leaned back in his chair, and replied calmly, "I do not expect that from you. You are not here to pay for kindness." Asha looked at him from the edge of the firelight. In the warm glow, her strong face softened for a moment. "The man I met before you, he did not think like that." Morgan answered slowly, "I am not him." Asha said nothing more, but her hand, which had been gripping the blanket tightly, finally relaxed as if she had just put down a heavy burden. That night, Morgan lay in his bed while Asha slept on the floor near the fireplace. But the space between them had changed. There was no more caution, no more suspicion, only two people sheltering each other from a brutal winter before sleep took her. Asha said softly, her back turned to him tomorrow. "I will help you with whatever needs doing." "I am not used to taking without giving something back," Morgan replied from the darkness. "Here, Asha, you do not owe me anything." Outside, the snow kept falling, but for the first time, in Morgan Hale's wooden cabin, the silence was no longer lonely. It was the beginning of something shared. In the days that followed, the blizzard showed no sign of mercy. Wind howled across the roof of the wooden cabin. That evening, when the fire burned its brightest, Morgan noticed something strange. Asha was sitting still, too still. Instead of watching the flames, she was staring into the dark corner of the room where the shadows stretched long, like a ghost from the past. He added another log to the fire, then asked gently, "The wounds on your shoulders, those were not from the mountain path, were they?" Asha did not answer right away. Her face remained turned toward the shadows, her dark eyes focused on a place that no longer existed. At last she spoke. "Not the mountain. People did this." Morgan sat down beside her, keeping just enough distance so she would not feel cornered. "Who?" Asha still did not look at him. She pulled the blanket off her shoulders, revealing the long, deep scars, purple bruises, some twisted and healed, and crooked lines. "My own tribe." Morgan froze. Asha continued, her voice low and steady, almost too steady. "They wanted me to be a concubine to an old man, a man with power, land, and warriors." I said, "No." She curled her lip, not in a smile, but in something bitter, like mocking her own fate. "They said I was a traitor. They beat me, told me I did not deserve to live among them." Morgan clenched his fist, though his voice stayed calm. "Then they cast you out." Asha nodded slowly. "They dragged me to the edge of the valley. They said, 'Leave. You are no longer one of us.' So I left. From there to here on, nothing but my feet and the fire in my chest." Morgan looked at the scars, then at her proud, unyielding eyes. "No one has the right to do that to you. No one." Asha finally turned to face him. Her gaze was no longer sharp, like it had been on the first night, but filled with a weariness she had never allowed anyone to see. "I tested you," she said quietly. "From that first night, even the question I asked about men. I needed to see if you were like them." Morgan replied, "If you need to hear it again, the answer is still no." Asa took a deep breath, and for the first time she let the hurt show, raw and unguarded. "It has been a long time since I felt safe." The fireplace crackled like it was letting out a long sigh. And in that moment, in the heart of the harshest winter, Asha Redmoon opened the door to her past, and Morgan Hale stepped through it with a quiet gentleness that needed no words. "Thank you so much for being here." If this story brought back memories of dusty afternoons, of hoofbeats echoing in your chest, please subscribe to my channel so that every day we can sit together again. And I will tell you one more story from the West. In the days after Asha opened up, the cabin felt different. No more cautious footsteps. No more wary glances like in the beginning. Asha grew used to Morgan adding wood to the fire before she woke up, used to the cup of hot water already waiting on the table, and to the way he quietly patched the cracks in the wall near where she slept. And Morgan grew used to the solid sound of Asha's footsteps outside, the way she lifted logs that took him a full minute just to drag. He got used to the feeling of someone else in the house, yet it never felt crowded. On a late winter afternoon, Asha stood in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes gazing out across the white valley, her breath curled into thin mist. Drifting across her strong, still face, Morgan stepped up beside her, holding a mug of hot coffee. "The sky is calm today." Asha took the mug and warmed her hands over the steam. Then, out of nowhere, she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, "When spring comes, what happens then?" Morgan said nothing. He did not answer right away, because he knew she was not just talking about the weather. Asha was asking about herself, about them, about this roof over their heads, about something neither of them had dared name. He sat down on the porch step beside her. "What do you want to happen?" That question made Asha turn her head slightly, and for a brief moment, her dark eyes flickered with uncertainty. In that moment, she was afraid of losing what she had only just started to trust. She did not reply, but her fingers gripped the mug just a little tighter. As if trying to hold on to its warmth, Morgan looked down into the valley, his voice low but steady. "You do not have to leave, unless that is what you choose." A long silence stretched between them. Then Asha sat beside him on the step, her shoulder brushing lightly against his, just a brief touch. But it said more than any words ever could. "I never thought there was a place I could choose," she whispered. Morgan turned to her. "Now you do." Asha let out a long breath, like setting down a weight she had carried for years. She leaned into Morgan's shoulder. Not much, just enough for him to know. She had made her decision, even if she had not spoken it aloud. The night breeze swept across the porch, carrying the scent of damp pine wood. The sky darkened in the distance, but there was no storm on the air, only the gentle stillness of a winter coming to an end, and the quiet promise of something new waiting to begin. On that wooden cabin, two people who once lived in silence were learning to stand beside each other. And from that evening on, both Morgan and Asha understood. Spring would bring an answer. Winter had finally begun to retreat. The snow was still deep, but the wind no longer howled. At night, the sharp whistles no longer cut through the wooden walls. One morning, Morgan put on his heavy coat, shut the stable door, and said, "I need to make a trip into town." Asha looked at him, a flicker of concern in her eyes. "How long? Half a day? I will be back before nightfall." Asha nodded. But Morgan could see the tension behind her strong features. She was not used to him leaving. Deep down there was a quiet worry. He gently touched her shoulder. "I will come back. Do not worry." Asha pressed her lips together, then nodded again. Morgan rode off. Asha stood at the doorway until the sound of hoof-beaters vanished into the pine woods. The town at the foot of the mountain was crowded and noisy in a way Morgan had never liked. But today, he was here for something else. He stood before the office of the local attorney and wrote down the words in clear letters. Asia Red Moon, permanent resident under protection of Morgan Hale, when the red seal was stamped onto the paper. Morgan felt something big had just been made right. It was not ownership, it was belonging. Status, safety, a legal acknowledgement that Asha was no longer someone cast out. He rode back at dusk, crossing snow-covered hills glowing purple in the sunset. The door opened before Morgan could knock. Asha stood there, that tall, powerful woman who had once withstood the beatings of an entire tribe, but now her eyes shone with unmistakable relief. "You came back. I told you I would." Morgan handed her the paper. Asha took it with both hands, reading the lines as if she could not quite believe them. Then she looked up. "Why did you do this?" Morgan answered simply, "Because you deserve a place to belong." Asha was silent for a long time. Her strong lips trembled ever so slightly. She set the paper on the table, then took a step closer. That night, the wind drifted gently across the porch. Snow fell slowly, softly, like white dust. Asha stepped into Morgan's room without hesitation. She stood by his bed, her voice low and steady like a drum beat. "I am staying." Morgan looked up into those dark eyes, once filled with nothing but pain. Asha whispered, "I want to live with you." Morgan did not pull her in, and he did not stop her. Asha lay down beside him, and they began to kiss, giving each other warmth in the language of touch. Outside, winter was dying, but inside Morgan Hale's small cabin, something entirely new was being born. Spring did not arrive with blazing sunlight, but with the strange silence of melting snow. Tiny patches of ice turned into streams, trickling down through the rocks. The air was damp, carrying the faint scent of pine, the smell of life returning. Asha stood at the doorway, looking down into the valley as it slowly shifted colors. Her black hair fell over her broad shoulders, and the breeze made her thin shirt rippled gently with each breath. She was still the strong woman Morgan had first met, but her eyes no longer looked so lost, so wild. Morgan stepped out behind her, holding 2 cups of hot water. "Looks better than winter, doesn't it?" Asha took the cup and sipped. I have never seen snow melt. With someone beside me, Morgan stood close enough for his warmth to reach her. "Asa, I want to take you somewhere." She tilted her head slightly, cautious not of him, but of something she could not quite predict. Morgan just smiled. "Come with me." They walked through the pine forest behind the house, where the ground had started to show patches of soft, damp brown. When they reached a small clearing, Morgan stopped. It was the largest pine tree on the mountainside, the place where they had built fires during the early days of winter. Back when Asha was still keeping her distance, Asa looked around. "Why here?" Morgan stood facing her, took a deep breath, and spoke, not nervous, but clear. "You being here made this place a home." Asha squinted slightly, not quite understanding. Morgan stepped half a pace closer. "You stayed with me, and I want the 2 of us." He scratched his head, a little awkward. A quiet moment settled between them. Asha looked at him, her dark eyes shifting, not with fear, but with something else. "What is it you want?" Morgan nodded. "I want to marry you, not because you need shelter, but because I want that with you." Asha looked down at her hands, hands once bruised and bloodied, hands that had fought an entire tribe to keep her freedom, and now those hands trembled slightly. She reached out and touched Morgan's chest, right where his heart beat steady, like a promise that would never break. Then Asha said softly, her voice low and warm, "We will be a family." Morgan did not rush to embrace her. Instead, he rested his forehead against hers like 2 warriors sealing a vow. And in that moment, no witnesses were needed. Only the rustling pine trees, and 2 souls who had once been alone, now choosing to belong to each other. The wedding happened that very afternoon, simple, peaceful, and strangely beautiful beneath the pine forest and a pale blue sky. Asha Red Moon was no longer an outcast. She was Morgan Hale's wife. That summer came earlier than usual. The snow had melted completely from the mountain slopes, revealing green meadows and golden wildflowers stretching along the hillsides. The wind no longer carried the bite of cold. It smelled of warm pine resin full of life. In the yard of the wooden cabin, Asha was hanging out thick blankets to dry. The sunlight lit up her broad back as the wind made her shirt ripple gently with every breath. Her body was still muscular and strong, but now there was something softer in her movements, more at ease, as if this place had truly become home. Morgan walked out from the stable, sawdust still clinging to his hands. He called out, "Ah, take a break, the sun's too harsh." Asha turned to him. She did not walk over right away, just looked at him with the faintest smile. Then she placed a hand on her belly and sent that smile straight into his eyes. Morgan froze. "Asha," she slowly stepped closer to him. Without speaking, she took Morgan's hand and placed it over her stomach, still flat, but with a strange, gentle warmth inside. "In a few months," she said softly, "there will be one more person in this home." Morgan could not speak. He just pulled Asha into his arms, one hand wrapped around her waist, the other still resting on her belly, as if he never wanted to let go. In that moment, the sounds of the forest melted away, leaving only the rhythm of their breath blending together. "Ah, thank you." She touched his cheek, her voice low and steady. "Do not thank me. We chose each other, and we are building the future together." In the weeks that followed, Morgan began fixing up the cabin. He added windows to let in the breeze, repaired the roof so rain would not leak through, and built a rough but sturdy wooden cradle next to the bed. Asha laughed when she saw it, gently running her fingers across the smooth grain. "You made all this by yourself? I wanted to prepare everything with my own hands." Asha looked at her man, the one who never demanded, never forced, but simply gave her a true home. She placed a hand on her belly and said, half joking, "This child will be strong, born from 2 people who do not break easily." Morgan laughed and pulled her closer. That evening they stood on the porch, watching the sunset spill over the valley. Morgan's hand rested on Asha's shoulder. She leaned gently into him. A simple image, but to them it was the purest kind of peace. Asha whispered, "I used to have nowhere to return to, but now this is my home." Morgan answered without hesitation, "It is our home. Inside that wooden cabin where once there had been nothing but cold winds, and a solitary man there now lived a warm shelter, a strong wife, and a future quietly growing inside her, a real family, and they would not part again. My friend, sometimes a person is strongest, not when they carry a weapon, but when they dare to let someone into their life. Pain teaches us to build walls, but only trust helps us heal. Love does not come to fill the void, comes to remind us that we are still worthy of being seen, of being cherished. And sometimes what saves a soul is not grand gestures, but the steady presence of someone who stays, someone patient enough to wait for us to open up and kind enough to never walk away. In the end, I always hope that you find peace and happiness wherever you are. I love you, my dear listeners of. Let me know what you think about this story. Drop a comment below, hit 8 if you enjoyed it, and do not forget to subscribe for more powerful Western tales coming.